morning. So, I'm kind of glad, I guess, my week wasn't as bad as Bill's, so I'm sorry, Bill. I thought was having a rough week when I had to finish. Today's my last day of my first class, and I am super excited because I have a paper to turn in, and all I have to do is one more citation, and I'm done. But this week has been a lot of headache of rewriting papers and reworking stuff, and I thought I was having a bad week. So, wow. But no, I am. I'm glad that when stuff happens, when hard times come, God is right there in the middle of it. And one of the songs that we've been singing, Eye of the Storm, that's been like my everyday song. I've listened to that song probably like 16 times a day, just because that's kind of been my song. I don't know why. I really enjoy that song. But over the past few weeks, we've been talking about growing pains. Whether that's a growing pain that we individually have to work with, or if that's a growing pain that we as a church have to look at. But those growing pains, they provide opportunities. And they provide opportunities for us to grow and to get stretched and to maybe get taken out of our comfort zones. You know, over the past few weeks, we talked about children as one of the growing pains that we talked about. And we talked about those who normally don't come to church. And then we talked about comfort zones and how God can sometimes stretch us from those. But we have 3 more weeks, today and in 2 more weeks. And these are probably 3 that I think are huge growing pains. And the first one that we're going to kick off with is unity. I believe that most of us, we strive to stay united with people, right? I mean, most of us, I think, we want to live in unity with others. I mean, we want to be united as a nation, and we want to be united under a candidate who can lead our nation the way that it should be led. By the way, that's probably the only time I'm going to talk about politics from the pulpit, so that's bringing me out of my comfort zone. But we want to be united, don't we? We want to be united as friends. We want to be united with our families. We want to be united when tragedy strikes. I think in my own life, one of those times that I saw this was in 9/11. It seemed like after 9/11, everybody had American flags, and it seemed like everybody in the world, well, everybody in our states, seemed to put aside all their differences and really gather around and stand united. That's one of those times that I can remember. But today, I don't really see that happening. And in fact, I believe that today we probably are as disunited as I have ever seen our country. We're probably disunited as people the most that I've ever seen in our culture. I mean, we stand pretty disunited about all sorts of stuff, don't we? I mean, we have Black Life Matters, and then All Life Matters, and people stand disunited on those sides. We stand disunited in laws, whether what laws to pass or not pass. We stand disunited in our presidential candidates. We might stand disunited in our own government bodies that we believe in, whether that's Republican or Democrat. We stand disunited about all sorts of stuff. Sometimes that's how we love others. Do we love others? How do we treat other people? And sometimes disunity creeps its way into the church. I don't like admitting that, but sometimes it's true, right? Sometimes we get disunited about what color the carpet on the floor should be. Sometimes that's just kind of one of those arguments. Sometimes it's about the paint color. Sometimes it's about the decorations that go up or can't come down. Sometimes we get disunited about the songs that we sing in worship, about who to hire as the lead or the secretary or whatever. But sometimes disunity sneaks its way into the church. And here's the thing, is it's not very uncommon. It happens quite often. And a lot of times, disunity causes splits. Now, let me clarify. Some splits have to happen, okay? Like, if one group is trying to follow after Jesus and the other group is like, we don't want to follow after Jesus, you should probably split, okay? Like, that's probably an okay split. But there's a lot of splits and there's a lot of disunity that happens over really silly things and things that shouldn't cause disunity. This unity, though, isn't a new concept. We might want to think that it's a new concept, but it's not a new concept. In fact, there's a lot of examples of it in the New Testament. And I'm sure we could go back in the Old Testament, we can find plenty of examples in the Old Testament as well. But there's two specific churches that really struggled with finding unity. The first church was the church of Corinth. Corinth really struggled with finding unity. And in fact, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, it really talks about how they really struggled finding that unity. 1 Corinthians 1:10, chapter 1, verses 10 through 16, they talk about who they follow. And some people say, well, I follow after Paul. And others say, well, no, I follow after Apollos. And others say, well, I follow after Cephas, who was Peter. And some say, well, I don't follow any of those guys. I follow Jesus. And you really start seeing that this church was breaking at the seams. And they were allowing their disunity to creep into the church. But there's another church. And we're going to focus on that church today. And that was the church of Ephesus. Ephesus has a rich history behind it. And in fact, through my research, I found that Ephesus was probably about the third largest church in the New Testament, right behind Jerusalem and Antioch. It was the third largest. But what's even more impressive about that was that there were great church leaders who that was the church that they served at. Ephesus was kind of the starting point for great church leaders, and then they got sent off. But Ephesus was really built on Paul's teachings during his missionary times. And so here's this church, and it's thriving. But there's some other stuff that's not so great about the city of Ephesus. In fact, Ephesus was a large influencer to the Roman and Greek worlds. It was a huge port city, and lots of influential people came in and out, and they brought all their ideas with them. But Ephesus also was a town known for its temples. There's a couple temples that were really intriguing. The first one was to a guy named Domitian. And Domitian, if we know anything about church history, is the guy who killed Christians. He was the one who started the persecution of the Christians. And he had a temple in Ephesus, and he forced people to go and worship at his temple. Kind of interesting. But there's another temple there. They dedicated the temple to Julius Caesar, but also to the goddess of Roma. The goddess of Roma was the goddess deity of the city of Rome, and they were really putting their influence in Ephesus. But there's another temple. And this one was one of the 7 wonders of the world. I mean, it's kind of impressive that Ephesus can say, hey, we have one of the 7 wonders of the world. But they had the temple of Artemis or Diana. And so here's this church, and it's thriving. I mean, it's the 3rd largest church in the New Testament. It's thriving, but yet it's surrounded by all these outside influences. And even though they're thriving, they're breaking at the seams. It's kind of interesting to me to see that. I mean, to see a church that could be thriving, but yet almost breaking at the seams. And not in a good way, in a bad way. In Ephesus, and Ephesians chapter 1 through 3, it really talks about how God had a plan for Gentiles. So one could assume that the church was full of Gentile people, but there were probably also Jewish people there. But these Gentile people, they were probably converts from these other temples. And let me tell you that some of their temple worship back in the day was a tad bit questionable. Maybe it was really questionable. It was really questionable in what they were doing as temple worship. And maybe some of those practices got slipped into the church. And so Paul spends the first 3 chapters of Ephesians showing that God had a plan for the Gentiles. He was really opening the Jews up to knowing that Gentiles were part of God's plan. And then he writes chapters 4 through 6. And he really shows a detail of how the church is supposed to give glory to God. And he really helps to highlight how we should follow God and how wonderful his plan is, and how we should follow his love and his power and all the blessings that God gives us. And the last 3 chapters of Ephesians are show the quality and the kind of life a believer should have, but also church should have in fellowship with each other. And this is where it leads us this morning. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. The very first thing that Paul writes is about unity. After he writes, hey, this is what God's plan is for Gentiles, this is how he starts off with how we should have a quality life. Ephesians chapter 4, 1 through 6 says this: As a prisoner of the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient with one another in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called with one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, through all, and in all. So, Paul writes to the church of Ephesus, saying, hey, put on some unity, okay, guys? Like, strip off everything else. You got to put on your unity. He calls them to live a life that was worthy of the calling that they've just received from God. He says, hey, knock it off. The first thing that you got to do is you got to set aside those differences. Throw on unity. And Paul's response to them is no different than what the response to us is. We can use that same chapter and apply that to our own lives. Sometimes we will have disunity among ourselves. Sometimes there's going to be disunity in the church. Sometimes there might be disunity in marriage or relationships. And that's because we're all different people. Disunity is going to happen. Paul was writing to the Jews and the Gentiles saying, hey, strip aside those differences. Put them aside. What are you guys doing? And he says, put on an attitude, humility, and gentleness. That's what we're called to do. Is we're supposed to be humble and gentle with people. Humility is just having a modest attitude or a low thinking attitude of oneself. So what Paul was saying was, hey guys, think a little lower of yourselves. The Jews and the Gentiles obviously couldn't stand each other. I mean, they were like Iowa State fans. I mean, those guys aren't going to be mixing very well, I'm sure. Their rivalry. I was going to say Iowa, Nebraska, but these guys can't stand each other. And so Paul says, come with humility. Strip away everything else and be humble with each other. Because, man, you guys can do some amazing things if you do so. I mean, as I've said, they were probably the 3rd largest church in the culture. They must have been doing something right at some point, because there's no way that you're going to grow that much with so much influence without doing something right together. But that's what we're called to do as well. We're called to be united ourselves. We're called to set aside our differences. Sometimes we're going to have differences. We're going to have differences in preferences and the way things should be done and shouldn't be done, because we're all different people. But we're called to strip away those differences and find middle ground and stand united. Because when we strip away those differences, when we strip away our personal preferences and we work together towards a common goal, man, we can do some amazing things. If we really stripped away our differences, if we really set aside those different preferences, we really try to find the middle ground, man, I wonder what we could do for our community. We could change the hearts of the people in our community. But even more so, we might be able to change the hearts of people in our nation and our world. But we got to strip away those differences. We have to be willing to say, hey, it's not just about me. It's not about what I want, what I need, what I prefer. Let's find middle ground. And when we do so, we shouldn't set aside those differences angrily. We shouldn't be angry or upset because we have to set aside our differences. In fact, we should be excited. We should be excited that we can find middle ground and that we're working together to find a common goal. We should not think so highly of ourselves and have a modest attitude. We can do this. Humility is great. Humility is something that I think we all need in our lives. Sometimes I need it in my own life as well. But we're called to have something else also. We're called to have gentleness. And gentleness is the quality to have what it takes to not get upset or angry. It's kind of a nice thing, right? Gentleness. In the book of Proverbs, in chapter 15 and verse 1, it says this. It says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Man, I kind of wish maybe my mom and dad would have taught that one. But man, if we approach someone with gentleness, with a soft word, with kindness, they're more likely to respond. I mean, most people don't really respond very well to a harsh word. Most people don't respond well when someone comes to you and they're really angry and it's not real gentle in how they approach, right? Most people are like that. People don't want to hear something negative most of the time. They want to hear something kind of positive, but obviously we have to be negative at some point. But they want us to not stir up anger. We have to be willing to take and say soft words, be gentle with how we approach other people. We can't just say, well, you made me mad and I can't do that. Or your preference is wrong and mine is right. We can't. We have to be soft. We have to have gentleness. In the book of James, it actually gives us a really good example of how to be gentle with others. In the book of James, chapter 1, verses 19 through 20, it says this. Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So being gentle, I think we get a good example there of what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. But oftentimes I think it's opposite of what happens. We're really quick to speak, but we're not so quick to listen. We might be a little slower at that, and we're really quick to anger. And a lot of disputes, that's what happens, right? 99%, maybe that's just a rough estimate, 99% of disputes happen because people aren't quick to hear. They're quick to speak, and they're quick to anger. They don't take that time to slow down and have gentleness with somebody. They don't take that time to say, oh, okay, let me hear what you have to say. Humility and gentleness kind of go hand to hand. To be quick to hear, we have to be humble. We have to be willing to set aside our own thoughts and say, okay, I'm going to listen to what you have to say. That's also being gentle, giving others opportunities to speak, others opportunities to voice what they have. But these aren't the only two qualities that we're told to have. In fact, we're told to have two other qualities, and that's patience and love for others. Now, patience, my grandpa always told me whenever I said, "Grandpa, you just have to have some patience," he would always say, "I'm not a doctor, I don't have patience." I always kind of found that funny, and it's true sometimes though. But patience is, there's so many reasons to have patience. And here's really the real reason, okay? It's because sometimes we could be hard-headed. Sometimes we could be a little bullheaded in our thought process. We might think that, nope, I am right and there is nothing anybody can do to change. Let me tell you something else. Others can sometimes be really bullheaded as well and hard-headed, and they can think, well, my preference is right and nobody else is going to change that preference. Sometimes that's the thought process. Sometimes we can be a little difficult to deal with, and sometimes others can be really difficult to deal with. So why do we need patience? Because sometimes we're bullheaded and we need someone to slow down and say, hey, I'm not going to get angry with you. I'm gonna accept, and I'm going to be okay. I'm going to slow it down. I'm not going to get angry. And that's what we need in our lives, because sometimes we can be very impatient. But man, sometimes we just need time. Giving people patience gives them time to see maybe that they need to change. Or maybe they need to meet in the middle. Patience is always probably a good thing. And even if you're not a doctor, you can still get patience, and that's okay. It just won't pay you as well. But sometimes we just need a little delay in our anger. Sometimes we're too quick to say, well, I'm done. I'm not doing that. That person's upsetting me. I'm walking away. We don't have enough where I'm going to say, I'm just going to hang out with them. I'm going to wait. But this is what we're also told in Romans chapter 12 and verse 12. It says this. It says, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. Hard times are going to come. People are difficult. Situations are difficult. But we're told to rejoice and hope. Hope of knowing that it's going to get better. So we rejoice the fact that, it stinks right now. It's hard right now. But it's going to get better. Tribulation, hard times, they're going to come. No matter who you are, no matter how old or how young, they're going to come, possibly even daily. So be patient. Delay your anger, slow down, stick with it. It's going to get better. Be in constant prayer. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Be praying always. Too often, when we see a situation or we're in a situation, we say, I'm done. And we don't think it could get any better. We say, well, they're really difficult. Man, my coworker, I could just punch her in the face. Man, life is just really tough. And it's not going to get any better. Oh yes, it will. Situations will arise in the church. Situations will arise with people, and we might say, well, I'm done. Can't do that. It'll get better. So hope. Be patient, stick it out, wait through it, pray about it. We'll get right through it. But there's one other thing we should do. Is we shouldn't let our anger stop us from having patience. Sometimes, obviously we just need to walk away from people. Some people are to walk away and we'll come back and talk to people, and then there's some people who we just have to talk about it right now. Sometimes we just have to walk away and we be patient, but we can't let anger ruin our patience. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 9, it says this. It says, be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the bosoms of fools. And our anger sometimes, and our impatience, frustrations, we become kind of foolish and we do foolish things. I'm not saying that that's ever happened to anybody, but I'm sure I've heard, I might not have experienced. We do foolish things in our anger sometimes. That's when we need to let patience run in our hearts. Let patience guide us. And then come to that last point, and that's loving other people. I could probably spend all day talking about loving other people. I mean, there's several verses that talk about it. But 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 says this. It says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant. Really, we could probably bring in the whole chapter of 1 Corinthians 13. I know that we use it for marriage, but really that's how we should love other people, not just our spouse. See, sometimes when we are finding unity with others, we have to compromise. And some people think, well, that gives me an opportunity to become proud that I get my way in some ways. Well, no. Loving others isn't being prideful. It's not being arrogant. It's not being boastful. But it's being excited. Being kind and patient with others. It's being excited and knowing that you're finding middle ground and working towards a common goal together. Unity is going to take time. It takes effort. It takes work. It's hard sometimes to have to deal with. Sometimes it requires a lot of effort on our end. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 14, it tells us this. It says, let all you do be done in love. Finding unity is going to take some love. Because sometimes people are really hard to work with. Sometimes people are really hard to get through with. Sometimes people are really hard to listen to. Some people might be really hard to talk to. But we're supposed to do that in love. When we find unity, when we're working towards a common goal, we're supposed to still love others. And let me tell you something. It's going to be hard. It'll be difficult. But we all need to do that. We all need to experience love in some way. And there's a reason for it. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 8 it says this. It says, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Finding unity means that sometimes there's just going to be disagreements. And sometimes it's going to bring out disputes. It's going to bring out anger and frustration. It might bring out some sin. But when we put it on love, we really get to find that unity with others. So Paul's writing to a church on the brink of division. To tell you this, the church actually only makes it about 300 years and then the church breaks off and then it's dead. And there's no church now there. Sad. But Paul's saying, when you guys put on humility and gentleness, patience, love, you get to find unity. The unity that you were called to by God. Because we're all united. Whether we want to admit that or not, we're all united because we're all of one family. Of one God. Of one hope. Jesus. One faith. One baptism. One God the Father. Above all, in all, and through all. So to find unity, this is what we must do. We must put on humility. We must say, okay, I'm not going to think highly of myself. I'm going to approach others with an attitude of modesty. And then we got to go with gentleness and say, hey, I'm going to go with the soft word. I'm not going to go in looking for, a tongue lashing. I'm going to be soft in my approach. We got to be patient with others because sometimes people can be bullheaded, but we could be just as bullheaded. And having patience is slowing down and not being quick to anger. And then cover ourselves with love. When we cover ourselves with love, we aren't looking for our own interest. We're looking towards how we could work together. We're looking at the whole. That's how we're going to find unity. That's what Paul was telling Jews and the Gentiles. That's what we're also told today. So this morning, I'm going to invite our musicians to come forward for our invitation. This morning, I want to ask this question. What trait are you missing? Are you missing humility? Maybe gentleness? Maybe patience? Maybe love? What trait are you missing this morning? If you're not missing any, then hey, that's awesome, and please come give me the secret of how to do that. But pray about it this morning. This morning, I invite you guys to put on humility, to put on gentleness, to put on love and patience, but to find unity, not only in our church, but also with others. This morning, if you have a need, if you want to talk about something, anything, you just need a hug, a high five, a handshake, I'll be up front as we stand to sing our invitation song at the cross.